So primers. You would think it's such a simple thing, but really the world of primers is, man, that rabbit hole goes pretty deep. When I first started in this industry, I started in a really small shop. There's maybe 4 techs working there at the time. And really all I knew was what was on the mixing machine, what was in our 4 walls there. And I think that's easy to kind of get lost in our world, right? All we really know is what we do in our shop. Sometimes it can be a little hard. I think today with social media and whatnot, it's a little easier to get some information and see what maybe the other guy is doing, which makes things really nice. But at the time, again, for me, I was very much like this, blinders on. Not consciously, but that's just how it was. So after working in the shop, I got a job at a distributor, and I was amazed. I was just shocked to find out all these different primers and things that were in the warehouse on the shelf. And I thought, man, I've never seen this before. What is this? What is this? All these different cans with different color labels, red, pink, gray, sealer, polyester. I just was surprised. I'd never seen that stuff before, so it didn't make sense to me. But it was just something I was never taught, right? I was just told, hey, put that primer on there. Okay, you do what you're told. So I wanted to take you guys through just some of the basics and some of the more key products that are out there, or if you're not using it, you should be using it or consider using it. I guess we'll start from bare metal up. So I wanted to start with Etch Prime. So Etch Prime is one of the things I surprisingly don't see being used very often out there, believe it or not. And Etch Prime is great if you have to strip a panel and you got it to bare metal, and it's aluminum or steel. It doesn't, whatever metal it happens to be. But that's a really great way to start. Etch Prime will give you excellent corrosion protection and adhesion. But even if you're not doing that, let's say you got a used fender, and the body tech had to, cut that paint back and apply his filler, and you've got this, I'll see big areas of bare metal, which is great, but I don't see them getting primed properly. I'll see them, preppers will just start pounding on the urethane, the filler primer that's just off the mixing machine, and that's it. Problem with that is, the corrosion protection isn't the best, and neither is adhesion. And I'll get calls, and we'll go to shops and spec jobs, and it'll be bubbling, and only way to find out what's underneath is to cut into it. We'll take a razor blade to it and get down in there, and it's rusty. There's no green, right? That Etch Prime is that gnarly olive drab kind of green color, and that's pretty apparent to see under there, and a lot of times you don't see it. So essentially, you need to etch. What I do see being abused is the aerosol etch, right? And typically the rule of thumb is if the piece of metal that you are priming is smaller than the bottom of the can, then go ahead and use the Etch Prime, right? An aerosol Etch Prime, I should say, to be clear. If it's bigger than that, you should be mixing up some 2-part and applying that stuff before you put your urethane primer on top. Check with your manufacturer piece sheet, and that's going to be a big theme with everything we try and ingrain in you guys here is read the information that's available to you. Generally it's in your computer, and if it's not, it's usually on your manufacturer website. Never hurts to double check, right? So for instance, with that Etch Prime, let's say you're going to seal it. Usually most manufacturers will recommend 2 coats of sealer instead of just 1. You want to form a barrier between the acid and your base coat. That 2-part Etch Primer is 100% acid. So if you never notice, one of the cans is metal and one of them is plastic, usually 100% of the time. The reason is because if that stuff that wasn't in plastic was in metal, it would actually eat that metal can. So it's some pretty potent stuff. You don't get that with an aerosol can. The aerosol can contains maybe 5% acid, so it's very, very mild in comparison. So etch. The next kind of bare metal treatment type primer to consider would be an epoxy. Epoxy primers generally are something that you would apply, let's say if you're doing a restoration, or in the commercial world if you've got a big metal piece of equipment that came back from the media blaster. You would bring that back, treat the metal, and epoxy that bare metal right away to protect it. Epoxy, just like it sounds, it's like a glue. So it provides excellent adhesion and excellent corrosion protection. The only thing with epoxy is, it doesn't really build, not that you need it to. There are some different epoxies out there. Again, if it's on the commercial side, there are epoxies that exist that you can apply straight over blast media profile. Blast media profile meaning like the scratch that's in the steel or whatever part it is. Generally when you're blasting sand or glass beads or walnuts or something at it, you develop this really rough texture that's coarser than a DA, let's say, than 320 or 220 or whatever that scratch may be. And you create these like kind of peaks and valleys where that epoxy will better perform on the commercial side. So there's a couple different versions, but not the highest fill and doesn't sand great. Again, it's like a glue, so it's like a two-part epoxy. It just doesn't powder. So not the best thing to try and prep over the top. Generally, something like that you would put, if you're looking for a filler primer, what you would normally use is maybe polyester. Urethane as well, but it depends. Let's say you're doing a restoration and you've got that thing epoxied and you've got body filler all over. A lot of times polyester, being the next maybe primer we'll talk about here, is super thick. That's kind of what it's known for. It's inexpensive, but it's porous. So you want to have something underneath it to really, it's not going to offer you really any corrosion protection there. So polyester works great in that world of restorations or something like that. It's inexpensive, it's affordable. So if you're going to block 90% of that away to get that panel nice and straight, and you're going to follow it up with a urethane primer, it's kind of the perfect choice. After polyesters, of course, we have the urethane primers, which is generally the workhorse in a shop. Usually the same can, you can use it a couple different ways as a surfacer, meaning, hey, you got some really nice, crisp, clean bodywork done. You don't need it to be overly thick. You just want to be able to block it nice with some 320 after 3-4 coats, and you should be good to go. It's usually referred to as a primer surfacer. Again, most of the time, that same primer can be mixed in a different ratio. Usually you end up leaving the reducer out, maybe not 100% of it. If it was a 4:1 to 1, you might mix 4:1 to 25% or something like that. And that's of course going to give you some more body if you need it to fill a little bit more. But that's typically the primer that we all kind of know that's in the shop, right? Today things are getting a little more exotic. UV is coming back, and I kind of caution myself, I guess, when I should say exotic, because it's been around. That technology has been around for 20 years. It's not new, but I would say that not every paint manufacturer has adopted the UV technology. It's not the healthiest thing, right, to expose ourselves to UV light. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I remember the light that we had. It looked like a Hollywood, light box with these shutters in front, and you had to wear the orange glasses. You still need to wear eye protection with that stuff. PPE, of course, always important. But yeah, that UV light is just it's a different animal. We've already got to deal with isocyanates and things that we need to protect ourselves from in the shop, and UV light is another one. It's UV rays. So, however, it does have its super fast. That's one of its greatest perks. Super quick, not the thickest, but let's say you have a fast lane kind of repair, 0-day RO kind of thing in your shop. Great option, right? It'll allow you to do those, smaller repairs, get them in, get them out. And nowadays too, manufacturers are going to a waterborne primer, which is not quite as fast, but definitely has some pros, I think. They're a little thicker, that allow you to build a little bit better, but the speed is still very much there. Where I really like to utilize that stuff is bumper repair, maybe 0-day RO stuff, like I said, where the bumper comes back from the body shop in 120, 180, some crazy scratch. You just, they hand it to you and you just go, oh man, like this thing is a mess. You would adhesion promote that bare plastic, apply a coat of your waterborne primer, dehydrate, very much like waterborne base coat, blow it dry, apply the second coat, dehydrate. And then what I would like to do is take my DA, some 320, and cut those hairs. Those two coats will begin to kind of bury those hairs down, that fuzzy plastic. I'll clean it, keep going, another coat, dehydrate, last coat, dehydrate. After it's done, it's ready to block and it's good to go. That was something that was kind of a challenge up until a few years ago. Really the only other option was to spray urethane primer. But the problem was, and if you were going to spray it that thick, you weren't painting it that day. It was just so thick, and you couldn't really, not supposed to bake primer filler. Generally, if there's no reducer in it on manufacturer P sheets, most of the time it's not recommended you bake. So anyway, quick rundown on primers for you guys. Hopefully it brings a little bit of clarity.